Hello, friends, and welcome to this podcast. I'm going to talk about music. Um, I played in bands. I spent a lot of my life playing in bands and a lot of my life listening to music and trying to figure out how to play in a band by listening to music, listening to other musicians, trying to learn their songs, trying to learn, not so much trying to learn their songs, but trying to learn how to make songs. How do they write songs? There's a lot of bands that I listen to, and I listen to them and I listen to them, and I cannot figure out how they wrote these songs because I don't have that. I have my place to write songs from, and I know people have their place to write songs from, but then you hear people who write these songs, you're like, how the hell did they do that? Where did that come from? It's such a great song. How do you pull that out of nowhere? And there's so many bands like that that I can remember. I'm surprised I even ever stayed in the business of music for as long as I did without just giving up because there's so many great bands. And I guess you just get to this delusional point if you want to stay, if you want to keep making music, you get to this delusional point where you're like, I'm just different from them. It's not that I'm better or worse, it's just I'm different. Right, yeah, sure. So, you fool yourself like that into thinking that you're, maybe just as good as these other bands, but you're just coming, from your own place. There was a band that I remember when I was starting out in my band career, listening to a friend of mine. I remember a friend of mine saying, "Have you ever heard of this band?" And I was like, "No." And he played some stuff for me, and I was kind of blown away by how much I loved this band. It just was exactly what I wished I could do as far as songwriting. And that's one of those things when you hear it, you're like, oh, that's what I wish I could do. And it kind of breaks your heart because you're like, but I can't do it like that. And that band that I remember is called the DBs, and they put out this album. This is their first album. It's called Stands for Decibels, which is what dB, if you see it like in notation or whatever, as far as how loud something is, it's a scientific description of how loud something is, how many decibels it is. If it's louder, it's more decibels. So dBs is how you abbreviate that, and the band is called DBs, which stands for decibels, hence the name of this album. But anyway, this album has got these great musicians. It's another one of those bands, I think it was just, I really appreciated them because they were so unpretentious. They weren't trying to rock you in, like a hurricane. They were just trying to play cool pop songs. The playing is really tight, really good. Very sophisticated for pop music in some ways, but then very simple in other ways. And I use the word simple as a high compliment because I think the best music, some of the best music appears to be simple or sounds like it just came out of nowhere just very easily. Somebody wrote this without much effort, and it sounds so simple, but it stays with you. And in fact, simple is very difficult. There's a tendency with musicians and songwriters, some songwriters, to overwork it, to overdo it. And with some musicians, when they record their music, to over record it, to add too many layers of guitars, too many harmony vocals, too many solo-y kind of sounds, and to fill in all the empty spaces and not to have anything that gives the song air. They want to fill it up with stuff. And one thing I love about the DBs is they didn't do that. Their songs have a sparseness to them. They're pop songs, and they do rock. I mean, the bass and drum team here, Will Rigby and Gene Holder, great drums, great bass, and then you got your Chris Stamey and your Peter Holzapfel writing the songs, and a real sort of pop, 80s pop, Lennon and McCartney kind of thing. They're very different songwriters, but I think they're really good friends because they still do stuff together. They still put out records occasionally. And their styles are very different. Like when you hear something that's Chris Stamey by himself or Peter Holzapfel by himself, very different style, but when you put them together, they sound, they have that style to a third style that emerges. And the DBs has the sort of more unusual type of songwriting with the more traditional songwriting combined in a way that works so well. This album has this cycles per second, which is another audio term, which is a really strange song, a pop song kind of a thing, cycles per second. But this song also has Bad Reputation, Dynamite, I'm in Love, Big Brown Eyes, Tear Jerkin, Espionage. Really great songs on here. If you can track this album down and get it, I would recommend it. If you like really good pop music, you probably already like the DBs. They've done several. They did several albums. They are no longer a band, but the individual musicians, I believe, are all still pretty active. I know that these two guys are still pretty active doing things. They've worked with other bands like REM and other bands. Chris Stamey has put out he wrote a book about his experiences with music, and that's recommended. He's also put out some CDs, some solo work, and it's all worth listening to. But I really love the DBs. Their first two albums are really great, sort of minimalist kind of pop. But I don't want to use that word to suggest that they're simple or infantile. They're actually quite complicated pop songs in their way, but they're very unpretentious. And some of their later albums get into sort of a more American style music. I believe the influence of Halsapple kind of comes in with some almost country style influences in some of their later work. But this is like pure sort of power pop. 1981, I believe. Very cool stuff. I think it's the kind of music that back in those days, I think, inspired a lot of bands. And one cool, interesting thing about this album cover that Chris Stamey's got his hand like that, is sort of an homage to the movie Last Year at Marienbad. He says he said that on social media, so it came from him, as far as I know. But there's a woman in that film who, every time you see her, she's got her hand like this. It's some sort of symbolic gesture, I guess, but he did that as an homage to that film. Anyway, this is an album you should track down if you can. It's a great pop album. This one and all their other albums. Every DB's album is great. This just happens to be their first album. Highly recommended. That's all I'm going to say about it. That's the DBs. They were such an influence in my early band years, and I saw them live quite a few times. Always put on a really fun show. And thanks for listening, and I will talk to you again real soon.